It's April 15th, 2021, and we're recapping the LCS Finals Weekend and getting caught up on the LPL Spring playoffs with Emily Rand. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and today we are welcoming Emily Rand back to the show. How's it going, Emily?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really good. It's an afternoon show on a Thursday, a little different from the typical Wednesday morning, but I think we got the same vibe going. It's feeling very spring today for me. Hot and sunny, streaming in through my window. Not sure how things have been for you. Is it a nice, hot, sunny, average kind of a day for you?
Yeah, it's still every day here is pretty much 70 70 to like 76 degrees for the high, and then like 50 degrees gets down to maybe at night. And it's always sunny. So LA is always sunny. It's like
Good
living in a
old
bubble.
LA. Yeah, it's a little different here. More Pacific Northwest. We haven't had rain in like a week and a half, and it's starting to feel really strange. But we're not here to talk
And
about
it's
the
like
weather and chit chat. Haven't had you on the show for a couple months. It's been a while. I think the last one was episode 18, I want to say. So it's been a little bit. Thrilled to have you back. You have spent the spring split on the analyst desk. You were on the desk this past weekend with the
yeah.
LCS finals and the semifinals before that. So excited to have you back now that you've been more seasoned and weathered by that experience. And we'll go back and compare your performance from last. No, I
Yeah. I mean, I've improved, but I'm nowhere near I need to be as a broadcaster. So,
everyone is always their own worst critic, and we've had a lot of people praising your work there and the vibe you've brought in. So I'm looking forward to talking about the LCS finals with you because we are just the week after that. Was a really exciting weekend, especially the Cloud9 TL best of five. I think there's a lot to talk about there, and I also want to take this opportunity to learn a little bit about the LPL and do some, have you help me with some of my catch-up homework going into MSI because I haven't been able to keep up with it at all. So let's start with the stuff that's a little closer to home. Let's start with the LCS finals. We had Team Liquid get through TSM on the Saturday,
mhm.
and then in a series that honestly was not great, didn't look good. I was actually kind of discouraged by it. And then they come in on Sunday, playing with Armeo, who they had to be an emergency jungle sub, basically. And they come in and they play C9. Great series, 5 games, really close. What was it about that series you think that allowed it to be so close when most people came into the weekend expecting Cloud9 to, like, oh, Team Liquid are playing terrible, they're just going to 3-0 them?
I think part of it was draft, and by that I don't mean that like everything was decided in draft. I liked some things that TL did. I liked some things that C9 did. I disliked some things that TL did. I disliked some things that C9 did. But on the whole, you saw kind of both of these teams generally stick to their like a similar philosophy throughout the series, and TL in their series with TSM, we saw this, and we were kind of looking at that because it, like you said, it was not the greatest in terms of quality. And we were looking at that series, and we are like, okay, TL is not going to be able to kind of sit back and pick these kind of scaling, more like late game 5v5 compositions that they chose against TSM because
Mhm.
TSM, we've criticized them, or I'll say I've criticized them. I think you have too, for a lack of proactivity in the early game. And if when that happens, you can just kind of rely on them
Yeah.
to not punish you, even if you pick, losing lanes plus Hecarim, which
Yeah.
is something that TL does, and something that is like, it's just one of those things. It's not like particularly egregious. It's not more egregious than a lot of other things that happen. It's just one of my personal weird, like, please stop doing this. But anyway, that aside, I was concerned that going into the series, TL would continue to do that. And for the most part, I do think they stuck to scaling generally. But then what ended up happening was with some of C9's drafts, they would draft a little bit more for like early to mid game. And then if they made some execution errors in that mid game, especially, it was kind of easy for TL to come back in as long as they weren't like super, super, super far behind. So I think that was part of it. I also think Armeo, while I know a lot of people have opinions on how good he is and how unfortunate it was that Santorin was not in. And I am actually really sad that we did not get to see Santorin. Not that I think it would have made a difference. I already said on Hotline League and on the analyst desk, I still would have picked C9 regardless. But I do think that with how close it was, I would have been really curious to see Santorin in the lineup. Because I do think he's just a better jungler and has obviously had more practice with TL. So
even if it's only like one or two more properly timed covers on Alphari's top lane wave crashes or something like that, like one or two early game kills in that series, does that swing it, right? Maybe. Hard to say.
Or like recovering from the initial cheese a little bit more gracefully, maybe in game 5. Although I have it on good authority that Armeo has seen that exact situation several times. So, but you know, that aside, I do think that one of the reasons why it was so close was just due to, like I said, the different draft philosophies. I really appreciated that C9 focused early to mid more often than not, just because we see, you know, few teams in NA do that compared to focusing more on having a late game scaling option and a 5v5 fight. And I appreciated how they tied that into how they do like to play the top lane around stacking waves. We also saw them do the same thing bot side around stacking waves and have Blabber go down there after going top and getting Fudge ahead. So I thought above all else, and this is also the reason why I still would have picked C9, I think the difference maker for C9 is that Blabber's communication with his lanes is, I would say, probably, like, from my perspective, obviously I can't hear the team comms, I don't know what's going on. But from what I see on the map and my perspective, I do think that C9 have the best jungle to lane communication of any team in North America. And that's why I still would have picked them to win.
And that's something that, like, so in the episode of Run It I did this week, it pretty much honed in exactly on that kind of thing with the setup. Like the second half of the episode is all about, here is an in-depth example of how Fudge stacked a wave to set up Blabber to come in and do a first blood gank, right? And I think that's a thing where I set it up to fully give Fudge credit for it, and you know, and I think it's fair to give him a lot of credit for that setup because manipulating the waves is the laner's job. But it's equally something you can praise Blabber for because it's clearly the two of them communicating. I am going to do this with the waves, and it is going to create this scenario. So if they do that, you will be able to do this, right? And it's something that it's the coordination of the entire team. Even the mid laner, to some extent, needs to be involved in that whole thing. And so I think that's something that Cloud9 definitely does better than the rest of the LCS teams. And it's something that, like, when you talk about TSM lacking proactivity, it's a very frequent thing that you'll see the junglers trying to do one thing, maybe the side lane is trying to set this up, mid doesn't move with it quite right, and then the opportunity is kind of lost. Nothing really happens, and if you're not looking for it, you might not really notice that there's an opportunity lost here, right? Or sometimes they do get punished for it, and there have been cases where we've called that out as well, but it's something that Cloud9 definitely does very well, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of people, and again, I can't say whether this is attributed to, or whether this is all him, or whether it is Blabber. My guess is it's probably a combination of the two. It's Blabber just having, you know, more experience. Like, he was already an MVP jungler last year. He has another year under his belt going into this year. And then there's the additional perks. And something that everyone has always consistently talked about to me about perks is his level of communication. And that's not saying he's like puppeteering the rest of the team or like being like this massive player coach or anything like that. Like, I don't think it's how people necessarily think about, like, oh, Perks automatically steps on the team and suddenly it's all about him and he's controlling everything. That's not it. But I do think his experience probably helps facilitate that communication between lanes and Blabber. And it's something that I think, for me personally, Blabber has improved on, like, exponentially from last year. Is his early pathing and his jungle to lane communication.
Yeah. And it's also the kind of thing that, like, it's not something that you just talk about inside the game. Like, oh, they did this with that wave and they're reacting to it. No, this is planned out, right? And so
Yeah.
understanding, it's developing that fundamental understanding of what you can do with the waves or what you should do with the waves and what it leads to, which is all stuff that happens during the scrim process and during the learning process. So that's something I could definitely see Perks bringing in, just improving some of their situational understanding of that. And also the coaching staff, right? Like, the coaching staff can come in and give very good help to have those understandings and to set up, we're planning this for the first 6 waves, so your job is, right? And they figure it out. So it's not just about talking how they execute within a single game. It's an overall mindset and understanding. And that's something that, like, I think, Alfari criticized himself, I think, a little bit after the series. I think there was some, disagreement at different levels about, did Alfari play worse than normal? Did he play the same as usual? And Cloud9 just knew how to exploit him. Like, where do you kind of fall on that part of the topic?
I mean, I think there were, like, as much as we get on the analyst desk and we talk about, like, individual matchups, I think that especially with top lane being just generally a lot more volatile this year, there are a lot more volatile matchups. You can purposefully make it a lot more, lot, or I'll say a lot less stable. Depending on what you pick. We're going to talk about the LPL later, but, like, hey, guess what? They punished that blind Gnar with some cool and fun counter picks. So I think I don't want to, like, separate Alfari and say, like, it's definitely his fault. I think he should have, like, after the last series even, he should have known exactly what C9 want to do, because it's not like a particularly, it's just like a very basic setup, right? With how you're playing the wave. So in that regard, I think Alfari should have been maybe a little bit more aware of how he was going to get overextended and the fact that they are going to be looking for Blabber to come up top. Now, I think on the flip side of that, if he does have Santorin, they're maybe communicating a little bit better around that, despite the fact that obviously it was a target point and focus for C9 in their first series. This is another reason why, like, again, I'm not trying to take away from C9's victory. I feel like I have to, like, insert this caveat all the time. I still would have picked C9 for the reasons I already said, but I would have been curious to see how that jungle to top communication, if it would have changed or if it would have improved, and what they would have learned from that first C9 series, because you could see shadows of what happened in the final in that series around how C9 played around Fudge and how they basically forced Alfari to overextend.
Yeah, I think the part of that gets the most interesting to me is this idea of, like, is Alfari forced to extend there, or is he put in a situation where he has to do something different than usual to avoid extending, right? And to what extent is he able to defend himself from that just with the way he controls the waves? And one thing I've always kind of wondered a little bit about Alfari is, does he have that same level of, like, he's obviously very, very good at 1v1 punishes and trades and out CSing his opponents. Like, he generates these CS leads all over the place, right? But I've never known if he had quite that same level of understanding of, hey, the next 3 waves are going to do exactly this, and their jungler's doing this, therefore I need to, like the kind of the sequential thinking and looking ahead on that, some of that stuff. Some of what some coaches would call the fundamentals. There are different types of fundamentals, right? It's fundamentals of wave understanding versus fundamentals of execution. But I've so often felt that he has a little bit less in-depth understanding of that stuff, and that's why he's able to be punished sometimes in these ways. And jungler can help cover for that, but I think he also could have covered for himself a little better in that series.
I think he does understand more than we've seen, but this is also where I feel really inadequate commenting on it, to be quite honest, because we can see Fudge's wave setup and the way Blabber plays around him, because the camera pans up there when that stacking wave is coming in, right? But we don't have pro view, so it's really difficult for me to see where or like exactly how Alfari is playing out those, like, really, really early levels. I can surmise based on what ends up happening, but it's one of those things where I really wouldn't want to comment any further without seeing Purview, which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
I miss it so much, and
Yeah.
hopefully we will be back in studio soon, and Purview will return to us.
I agree. I am looking forward to paying for that again because it's so worth it to me. I know switching completely to the other side of the map. I know you were quite impressed with Vulcan. You
Yeah,
shared your six thoughts, I think it's called, on allesports.com, and
yeah.
you called out Vulcan in one of those points. What was it about Vulcan specifically in his performance that drew your attention to him?
Yeah, so I highlighted Vulcan, I think 2 weeks ago, as someone who I was looking to kind of be like a breakout player if C9 did go on to win. And he was sadly, I believe, overshadowed by,
Yeah.
by his teammates once again. But Vulcan has performed really, really well. The past criticisms I've had of the Vulcan Sven lane is actually not on either of them as individuals in terms of being good, but it's about the fact that Vulcan seemed to be a lot more willing to go forward or
Mm.
willing to take some riskier trades. Again, willing to make bot lane a little bit more volatile, where Sven would just be kind of like, whoa, back it up. Like, let's not do that. And that's not saying one thing is necessarily better than the other,
Yeah.
because it also depends on laning, and I can't necessarily see the entire lane. But I did sometimes notice that disconnect when Vulcan would go in for, let's say, a 2v2 trade. And maybe Sven wouldn't be in the position to have like the exact proper spacing for it. And that's again not a comment on his spacing, because I think he's actually also insane and proved it in this series. And one thing I want to call out actually for both of them working together is that this was one of the series where I really saw Sven like have a little bit more of an edge to him that I like know he's had in the past, but we have seen him play, I guess, a bit more passively over the past few years, especially on TSM. But not as much on C9, but there have been, like I said, these kind of like a slight friction in terms of how each of them want to play the lane. And so I think Vulcan is really strong in team fights. Obviously, part of it is that he got he got one of his best champions in
Yeah.
Alistar, twice, I believe. But then additionally, I think we also saw Sven, especially on the Kaisa, being able to really, really use her repositioning to go in and assassinate people. And it was really awesome to see. I love the way Vulcan plays team fights. I really can't wait to see him on an international stage, just to see how much he's improved from
Yeah.
when he was last at Worlds on
With
Clutch.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they didn't win. They unfortunately did not win the game. They're in a really tough group. So, I mean, I think if you're looking at the group they're in, it's a tough situation because they kind of have to beat the teams they're quote unquote supposed to beat, because
Yeah.
they're also in a group with Damwon, and no offense to C9, I think Damwon
Yeah.
are the strongest team going into this tournament, and I think it's going to be really difficult to take a game off of them, even in a best of one round
Yeah.
robin for groups. So they are going to have to win the games that they like quote unquote are supposed to win against Infinity and DataFM. But I do think that I'm really curious to see that kind of same team fight control out of Vulcan. I really appreciated, I think it was in game, let me check just check drafts really quickly. I think it was in game 4 with the insane like Gragas, Alistar, Zoe composition with Sven kind of hopping around on the Kaisa. I really appreciated how both Vulcan and Fudge played their role in separating these larger 5v5 team fights that Team Liquid's composition wanted to set up with their scaling, and kind of separated them into smaller skirmishes. That's also where I value Vulcan sometimes, is in his team fight targeting and being able to understand like how to break up a fight that's more advantageous for whatever C9 are trying to do. So I also wanted to call him out for that as well, specifically in that game. I think him and Fudge, despite a few They also both had visible missteps in this game, so people are probably wondering like, why are you calling this game out specifically? But I do think both of them also had a crucial role in how those team fights ended up like breaking up into kind of smaller things where Perks can come in and land a bubble, where Sven can easily reposition and take someone out. It was very cool to see, especially since I was pretty down on this composition going into the game.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of positive signs from Vulcan, and I think he's so stable a lot of the time. To me, that's one of the things where, you know, he this year at least he's had
Mhm.
certain high points and really memorable moments, but the biggest thing to me has been just how stable he's been and how few like mistakes or throws there are in his game, which
Mhm.
used to be more of a factor because he is so aggressive, right? He does have
Yeah.
this real go in mindset, and that was one of the best things about him on Clutch. The whole team had that mindset, but Vulcan especially was a really good kind of trigger puller. But he's cleaned up so many things about his game, and then occasionally he'll make that big kind of standout play. But you know, when you have other people on the team doing stuff like Perks did, or like Sven did, or things like that, it does tend to overshadow the stable player.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love giving him credit. I actually have Vulcan's name on a C9 jersey, so I'm a big fan of him. So
Nice. I do not, but I did want to give him a shout out after
yeah,
this weekend because again, I felt like on in a series where I feel like there's a good like at least a good conversation for every single player in
yeah,
terms of like series MVP. I think that he was kind of the one that was overshadowed the most. So.
yeah. Well, I think that's fair. On the Team Liquid side of it, going into summer, do you think there's anything specific they need to focus on, or that that they need to be working on to, you know, avoid a repeat of this? Do you think they're at a place where it's just, hey, play it out next time? You know, we'll see where the meta goes. We'll have Centauran around. We're going to be fine. Or do you think there's something that they need to look at and say, hey, we got to reset on this. We got to specifically work on this thing over the next 2 months, or whatever, anything like that?
I do think in order to keep up with a team like C9, they do need to improve their jungle to lane communication. I don't think it was as big of a deal when it was more when jungle was a little bit more separated, but now as the patches have gone on, I know jungle is like a huge sticking point for people right
Mm.
now with Chemtank. But I do think, and I agree with those criticisms, by the way.
Yeah.
But I do think that uh, as the patches have gone on this year, we've gotten to a point where you do have to communicate with your lanes a bit more. You do probably have to interact with them a little bit earlier than previously, where I feel like in the very beginning of the split, you could really get away with almost like AFK power farming. I mean, with the, like we're gonna fight over double scuttle and we're just gonna make sure that the other jungler is like completely out of it, and they can't get back in. And it's going to be all about like farming, carry, and that's it. I do think that you generally do have to interact with their lanes a little bit more as the patches have worn on. And I think that this is something I've been calling out TL since they started quote unquote struggling in the regular season. Where during lock-in they were getting so many of their advantages from 2v2 bot side, where it
Mm.
would just be a solo kill or a solo double kill from
Yeah.
outlaning their opponents, right? Um, and they would really easily transition that into bot side objectives like Drake,
Mm.
which teams tend to either over focus on or under focus on. And when I say that, I mean you can skip early drakes to get other stuff on the map. Like I promise, it actually works. And you don't have to fight 5v5 over first drake in the
Yeah.
river. You also don't have to fight 5v5 over scuttle in the river either. Um, this is not just an NA thing. It
No,
happens in
it's
LPL
not.
all the time. But I think when you're looking at TL and the way they played in the beginning and the way they played in the lock-in tournament, they had trouble transitioning that play to um, topside. and they had trouble transitioning. Like, say Alfari did get an insane laning bonus. Say he did just like flat out outlane his opponent, right?
Yeah.
They had trouble transitioning that advantage into better map control, into having him go out and split push and leverage it that way. I would actually love to see them do more around the 1-3-1. I would love
Yeah.
to see improved communication between Santorin and his lanes. Those are the two things that I would identify for TL going into summer. And that's obviously like, I feel like in the grand scheme of things, like that's not a bad place to be, right? Like they're still, in my opinion, like it's C9 and then TL and then a gap and then
Yeah.
TSM. And then
Yeah.
below that, the rest. So, like, I still think that this is the second best team in NA, and I think they can be really, really good. But those would be, I guess, if I had to highlight two things going forward, I'd like to see them try out more 1-3-1 and try to leverage cross map a lot more. And then I'd also like to see increased level of communication between Santorin and his lanes.
Yeah, it's the subtle things really, right? Like to me it's the things that take a collection of good players and turn them into a great team. It's that one like half step layer that makes all the difference. And those are the things that I think C9 just does a little better. I think TL pound for pound probably has more individual player skill right now than C9, just in my opinion. It's very close. But C9 has more of that kind of unity and more of that subtlety of coming together as a gestalt, as I sometimes like to say. So, and I don't think that's different from what I expected coming into the year. It's one of the biggest reasons that I was so high on Cloud9 coming into this season and have continued to be. I dipped on them at the end of the regular season. I thought C9 were starting to fall apart a little bit, and I lost faith. But this is where we landed. There are a lot of other things we could talk about with LCS, but there's also a lot that I'd love to cover in the LPL because I've been following mostly from the outside, watching the standings, looking at match results, without having much time or opportunity to kind of look into VODs or put those on and see what's really going on. So, I'm going to be starting my MSI prep soon so that I can do some good MSI coverage, have some commentary going in, set some expectations, know what these teams are doing. But, you being a close follower of the LPL, I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of cheat some of my prep there. At least tell me where to start. What are the most important things I should know? So what's the quick recap? Let's start there with what's kind of been going on over in China, and they aren't at the end of their spring playoffs yet, and they've still got some to go. But maybe you can use this as a way to lead into the finals that are coming up this weekend.
Yeah, so finals are this Sunday. So I guess like quote unquote Saturday night for NA time because it's still technically morning, but whatever. It's still technically Sunday morning, but it's like at 2 a.m. for me anyway. So yeah, let's start with, I guess I'll start with the popular teams that everyone cares about. IG lost to Rare Atom, which is the team formerly known as Vici Gaming, in a banger of a series that was more of an IG loss than it was a Rare Atom win. And that was interesting because I think IG really should have won that series. Had some pretty insane throws where they ended up fighting where they really shouldn't have. The big story coming out of that upper bracket, so for those that don't know, LPL this season, they tried a new format, which is this massive bracket that gets to double elimination in the fourth round, where the top two teams are seeded in. So basically, the top two teams are seeded into like a winners bracket semifinals. And then so it starts in round one. That was Rare Atom, IG, and then Suning, LNG, FPX, and WE were seeded into round two. JDG and TES were seeded into round three, and RNG and EDG were seeded into round four. Wow. The big story for me, it's like it was a massive bracket. There was a playoff series like every single night for a week, which was great. The big story coming out of the winners bracket is definitely FPX. for those that don't know, FunPlus Phoenix has had a lot of issues this year, a lot of which are out of their control. Basically, Tian, at the beginning of the season, he said he had a few mental health issues. He's also been struggling with injuries all last year, for anyone who wasn't paying attention to that either. So he stepped down. They brought in Bo, who fit with the team really, really well. I think they made a lot of adjustments with Bo, where previously it would be like Tian coming in and covering for Doinby's wave, so he would be a second jungler, right? That was kind of like the typical setup for FPX style. But when Bo came on, they did a lot of really cool things to cover him to make sure he had time to farm up and contribute. He was performing really, really well with the team. I think a big part of it is how much Crisp was able to do for him, actually. Mm-hmm. Crisp has had, after kind of a lackluster season last year, I think he's had a good season this year. But then Bo was implicated in match fixing, which was, I'm going to say, like, not necessarily quote unquote his fault. He did do it, so they had to bench him. However, it's more of a systemic problem in the LDL, which is actually why the LDL is shut down right now. They shut down to investigate all of this stuff because a lot of it is external pressure on these kids. So it's looking like Bo's situation was one of those things. And so hopefully they do actually investigate it deeply and make it so that none of these kids are getting that kind of external pressure, because that's really, like, poop. Anyway, so then you have Beichan coming in. He performed okay. Then Tian steps back in for playoffs, and I was not expecting him to perform well with this team, and this has basically been like Tian's career resurgence. Like, he's back.
Yeah. And I mean, to be clear, he won World. Like, he was part of that. He was the finals MVP when FPX won Worlds, right? So
yes. And so that is just like even taking out like how they've been performing, which has been interesting. The fact that this is Tian, right? And that he came back from all of this and is having this like kind of really cool like career renaissance is just an awesome story. And it's part of FPX's journey to the finals, you know? I think another thing to pay attention to with FPX that's really cool that people often forget about Doinby, because they know him for the weird picks, right? Like, they know him for, I was going to say Renekton mid, but now like every LPL mid laner plays Renekton mid. You know, something to think about, North America. You know, if you don't hate Renekton enough already, like, put him in mid lane.
It's been getting played in Academy, I think, right?
Yeah, Academy is always, for those that don't know, as an aside, Academy and Amateur is always great to watch because of that, because they try out so many picks that LCS teams just won't. They're still really good. But Doinby, I think people kind of forget that he can also play a lot of things, including something like Akali, for example, right? And that was in the EDG series. The last series they had against RNG, they really set a super early kind of proactive pace where Tian was interacting with his lanes pretty early. RNG looked visibly uncomfortable with how quickly FPX were committed to kind of snowballing any sort of early advantage they got. So that's something to look out for in the finals coming up. And then we have RNG, who, so no one expected FPX to be here, or most people did not expect FPX to be here. I expected EDG to make the final, and then I expected RNG to make the final from the losers bracket, like they did. Basically, I expected RNG to beat whoever they faced in round 4. I expected EDG to beat whoever they faced in round 4, which I believe I did predict to be TES, and it was TES. And then I expected RNG to face EDG in the actual like semifinal, so basically the winners bracket final, and then they would face each other again when RNG would qualify out of the losers bracket final. That is not what happened.
I followed
EDG
all of that
actually.
perfectly.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. You should just like Photoshop right now. You should just take my face out of it and like take the thing of the LPL bracket. But that's not what happened. FPX beat EDG in like a very close 5-game series in the winners bracket final. And this is where I want to give Doinby a shout out for his Akali. Again, I feel like people forget that Doinby can kind of play like assassins and that he has a very deep champion pool beyond the weird picks, right? And then obviously staple mages, like he's a Victor player, he is an Orianna player, both of which are very good in the current meta. So it's really difficult to ban Doinby out right now, which is always going to be a positive for any Doinby team.
Yeah, for sure.
The addition of the fact that tanky initiators are kind of still in meta for the bot lane also really helps because Crisp is a good initiator, and it also means that if they are pulling him up to cover waves ever, he's a lot more tanky and can deal with a lot more pressure. And then the big surprise for me is that RNG made it out over EDG. Because going into the series, I thought EDG were going to have this match. They ended up dropping their first 2 games to RNG and then almost completing the reverse sweep. The big difference makers for RNG, I know you really wanted to talk about Cryin. I actually really have loved watching Wei for most of the season, which is the RNG's jungler. But for those that may recognize him from a team that you may have followed last spring that did surprisingly well in E-Star, he was on that team and then came to RNG along with Cryin. So both of them were on that E-Star team that did shockingly well last spring before they were eclipsed by the Victory 5 PP God narrative of summer.
Yeah.
But yeah, Wei and Cryin, they have, again, established jungle mid synergy. Looking at RNG, I think the main story for me, sorry I'm talking so much about this, people are probably already bored, is Xiaohu. If you remember, he was a mid laner. And I've joked that Xiaohu was really always a top laner. He just didn't play top. And by that, I mean, he's kind of always been the, like, put upon, like, I'm going to give up a lot of stuff for my bot lane. I'm going to maybe give up a lot of advantages for my jungler or push out the wave, so I'm going to cover for my jungler. I think the transition to top has been really natural, and he's been surprisingly good. Like, this is someone who's already, I would say, in the upper echelon of LPL tops right now. He's really smart about how he wants to play. I do think that they over-rely on the Gnar pick for him, and that's where, again, FPX did a good job of countering or counter-picking the Gnar. So looking ahead to finals, that's another thing to keep in mind is, you know, how will RNG adjust? Because FPX really seemed to, A, set a pace that they were very uncomfortable with, and B, be able to keep Xiaohu down from affecting team fights, especially when he was locking in Gnar. So I also would say that as many misgivings as I sometimes have about LWX, I do think he is a better bot laner than Gala in that he has a slightly larger champion pool and is not as... I mean, I just think he's a better team fighter overall. I don't think he's as much of a liability as Gala can be sometimes. Although Ming is having an insane season as well, so that's another thing to keep in mind.
It's interesting for you to talk about bot lanes potentially being a liability, because I think aside from LWX, you know, I think over the past couple of years, you've had these really, really great carry players in the bot lane when LPL teams go internationally, right? such a strong pool there. And I mean, there's this big legacy from Uzi, but it's been more recent that with Jackie Love and others like that. And to see bot lane potentially being a spot of relative weakness for the LPL teams, I think is a little bit of reversal of that trend, right?
A bit. I think people were already so like it's weird because going into 2019, LWX was weirdly characterized as this like insane AD carry, where I didn't think he was like terrible, but I also didn't think he was in the upper, uh, in the upper like part of AD carries at that World Championship. I think there were others that were better than him. But I think the main standout, it's interesting you say that because the standout bot laner for me and for most people in the LPL has definitely been Viper, who came over from Griffin, for those that don't remember who Viper is. And he, following Griffin, he had kind of this stint with HLE where they didn't do particularly well. And coming to EDG, he has been like just absolutely insane. I would say like definitely the best bot laner in the LPL overall for the season. And we are not going to see him represent the LPL. It's going to be either LWX or Gala. So I would say that it depends on who makes it as to how much of a quote unquote liability or weakness the bot lane will be.
Yeah, relative
the top side. Yeah. But if you are looking at these two teams, like putting Ming and Crisp aside, you're looking at the top side of either Joinby, Tian, Nuguri, or Cryin, Wei, and Xiaohu. You're not looking towards the bot lane as much.
Sure. And cycling back a little bit, like you said, I did want to talk about Cryin a little bit and hear a little more depth of what you thought of him, because I know that's a name that has come up a lot in the Oracle's Elixir Discord. People who follow the LPL there really were excited about him being able to come in, and when Xiaohu was role swapping a top, allowing Cryin to come in, people were, there's some people there who are very excited about that. I don't know if this is just, one of those pet players, which we all have, players that you want to see succeed and that you just feel more personally attached to. Maybe it was a little bit of that. Maybe is a little bit of him being the next big thing, but so I guess I was kind of curious what your take on that was. Is Cryin kind of like that next generation talent, or is it more of a did I get a bit of the wrong vibe from people overhyping him?
I don't think it's overhyped. I mean, I think he's another one of those LPL players that's been known about since before he started for eStar. When he did start for eStar, there was kind of the sense that he was always going to return to RNG because he came up in the RNG system. And he was a very well-known trainee, an LDL player from them. So I think that has something to do with like quote unquote the hype, or like how much people are talking about him, because he was on like if you have a trainee for RNG, if you have a trainee for like IG like Jackie Love was, you're going to hear about them, right? Just because these are big orgs, they're very popular orgs. But no, Cryin is, I mean, he is going to improve so much with time in terms of, jungle to lane communication, and in terms of like how he plays for around what his side lanes are doing. But in terms of an individual player, he is very, very good. He is someone that I'm looking forward to seeing grow in the position. And I think it is very fortunate for RNG how well Xiaohu has taken to the top lane. Like I said, he was kind of always a top laner, even though he didn't play top. And that has worked out. Like his strong game sense. I feel like Xiaohu is like this weirdly perpetually underrated player. He gets a lot of criticism and a lot of hate, but I think he's really, really good. And the fact that role swap allowed someone like Cryin to come in and perform so well in mid, it was a great, it was just really fortunate how it worked out. And again, Wei and Cryin have extensive history together, so that also helps. But I don't think he's overhyped. I think he's really, really good.
Okay. Yeah, on the champion pool side, when I look through what he's been playing this year, I see a ton of control mages. I see some reactant thrown in, as you kind of called out earlier. Do you think that's just him playing the meta, or is this like that's his comfort zone, or like maybe not as diverse as someone like Doonby, or
I mean, it's hard to be as diverse
yeah,
as
yeah,
Joinby because he will just, workshop picks that
yeah,
he really, really wants to play or he thinks are particularly good in certain matchups. Um, but I do think, to your point, you are kind of correct in that Cryin is, I would say, most comfortable on control mages. I'm just reminding myself of what he played last year,
yeah,
and it was a lot of Azir, Corki. He's a really good Cassiopeia player.
yeah.
He can also he had more games on Rumble than I thought. But I would put Doinby on the Rumble over I'd put
Yeah,
Cryin on the Rumble.
over almost
Um,
anyone.
yeah. Well, something. Um, but yeah, I think with Cryin you are looking at a lot more standard of a player. Which gives Joinby the edge only because he will go for, depending on what FBX want to do, he has the ability to go for some of these more volatile counter picks. Whereas we haven't really seen Cryin do that, right? Like it's more about having a stable mid lane setup, being able to set up 1-3-1 that RNG really love to do. Their split pushing is typically very good. That's actually why I thought that FPX's kind of like blistering game pace and then counter picking the Gnar really worked out well against RNG because they really couldn't get any sort of like 4-1 or 1-3-1 off the ground, which has been kind of their MO over the whole of the season. Um, so those are things to keep in mind to see how they adjust against what FPX did because
Yeah.
FPX just like swept them. Um, and it was not a close series.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm starting to get some hooks on what to pay attention to and what to follow along with. I think one more point I'd love to hit here is Nuguri specifically because,
Mm-hmm.
I loved his play last year, and he kind of did the con thing, move over there, try to take over in with FPX. The con move didn't work out for them so well, but it seems like the Nuguri move is working out a lot better. How has
Yeah.
he been playing, personally? Is this how much of their success do you think is attributed to him or him fitting into the system or how yeah, tell me about him.
Early on, when FPX were kind of like quote unquote struggling, and then like their initial, I guess, rise or their initial kind of like win streak, when they started looking better towards like early to mid split, I would say a lot of it had to do with Noguri. He's been performing really, really well throughout the entire split. He kind of offers what Khan did, but with better communication and
Hmm.
better map awareness. And a lot more versatility, in my opinion, when it comes to champion pool. Although we have seen, like, I know everyone loves the gif of Khan yelling no when they lock in Scion for him. And I believe it was LCK semifinals, if I'm not mistaken. It was either semifinals or finals. I forget which. Um, or yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was. Damn, I forget which. Anyway, they all blend together, but it's very funny. I think they're working on him becoming a little bit more versatile, right? But no, Nuguri's performed like insanely, insanely well, and he I think is another reason why they were able to integrate bow so well because if you have a stable top side, it just makes it uh, so much easier for the jungler to have enough coverage to kind of like fall back and farm, especially the way that the meta was going towards, again, like beginning more towards the beginning of the split. Um, but yeah, I mean his laning is great. His
Yeah.
communication with the team has only improved. There are several team fights I can think of where he like kind of single-handedly saved them. And then additionally, like going into this series, another thing that you really have to watch out for from Nuguri is the fact that he will just straight up pick counter picks.
Yeah.
If Xiaohu and RNG lock in that Gnar, especially like the blind Gnar. So that is something that FPX specifically have already proven that they're like very prepared to punish.
Yeah, and I think I love a lot of what you're saying about Nuguri, because I always thought, last year, I had the impression, and maybe it wasn't an entirely accurate impression, but I had the impression that people looked at Nuguri as this, carry, split push, very resource intensive kind of top laner. But I actually loved a lot of the way he played things like Ornn, and able to have just solid team fighting and could be an all around kind of a player. So to hear that he's doing that same kind of thing in China, a league where I think there's a lot of opportunity that he could, if that really was his identity, he could have doubled down on it and become this high resource, always has to carry, split pushing kind of a player. But I think he, has sometimes been unfairly characterized. And yeah, I love to hear him just kind of playing a stable kind of a game. I think it'll be fascinating if they do make it to MSI to see FPX with Nuguri go up against Damwon.
Yeah.
And do the kind of the weird stage roundabout grudge match.
I think they're weirdly, I mean, obviously FPX are hoping they make it, but I know there were a few interviews that came out with the Damwon players, I think with Ashley, where they did say, they were like, yeah, we hope that Nuguri makes it because I'm gonna beat him up, like Showmaker.
Yeah, of course.
Beat him up. I'm pretty sure it was Showmaker. But go check Ashley's Twitter if you want to see those interviews.
Yeah, that'd be correct.
Yeah, I mean, of both of these teams, I think both would be a good representative. I'm kind of rooting for FPX because I really love the Tian, like resurgence, and I also think that, and this is kind of said with the caveat that I haven't had time to study the MSI patch like really, really, really closely yet. But I do want to see a world where, again, junglers are interacting with their lanes a lot earlier, because I actually think it'll be interesting to see C9 in the meta like that. It'll be interesting to see Damwon in the meta like that, and it will really be interesting to see FPX in the meta like that.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of great junglers already going to Worlds, and I think that's going to be, and jungle is such an important role right now. Yeah, I can't wait for that. Well, thank you very much for bringing me up to speed on the LPL. I think I at least know what to look for in the VODs when I get around to looking at those now, so that's going to help a lot.
I skipped through a lot in the bracket review, so people should just go and if you watch any series, I would say watch the FPX EDG series and then watch the EDG RNG series. And then if you have time, watch the first FPX RNG series, because those are the two teams that are going to be playing each other again in the grand finals, and you can see all the stuff I talked about with how they attacked Xiaohu and how they kind of put RNG completely off kilter and ended up sweeping them 3-0.
Yeah, that sounds. For anybody who hasn't dug through these relatively new features of Oracle's Elixir, it can be a helpful way to find these VODs to watch. If you go to the team or player profile pages, there's a player's link or a team's link in the header, or when you're in an actual stats table, you can click the player's name or the team's name, and you can see a list of their recent games, what champion they played, and go straight to the VODs from there. So I think it's a pretty helpful way to pick out specific games to watch. So make sure you check that out. And to kind of cap off the episode, always give people an opportunity to ask some questions for the guests that we have on the show. You can do those in advance, patreon.com/oracleselixir. And so do questions there. Also some questions from the Twitch chat live while we're recording this. So I have a question from Edward Greene. He starts off the comment, thanks for being a great addition to the broadcast this year. And his question is there any topic or a thing that you'd like to do more of or try out on the broadcast in summer when you're back for the analyst desk?
Yeah, I would love to do, and this is not they won't let me do it. It's a studio communication thing where it's just a lot more difficult to do remote. So if we get back in the studio, if I am back in the studio again, got vaccinated today, so just have to get the second shot and it'll be good. I think that I would really love to do like a lot of what you see Kadril and Vedius doing with actually breaking down um, early jungle pathing, or like for example, with the way that C9 were playing top lane. Raz was the first one to bring it up, so he would have been able to, freeze it and then like circle the wave and talk about how they're playing around the stack wave top, and then we flip to bot side later on, and we can actually like circle. So I would love to. I believe it's called a telestrator when you circle
Yes, it
things,
is.
if I remember correctly.
You're a
I would
production
love to
pro
be
already.
able. Yeah, I know, right? Never used one before. I would love to do stuff like that because I think it's so much easier if you can see it visually, and that allows us to freeze something and see it. And again, this is not anything on the LCS. It's not like they're like, you can't do that. It's totally a remote versus studio thing. So
Yeah.
hopefully, even if it's not me doing it, that's something I would love to see our broadcast do a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. See, it'd be a lot harder for you doing that kind of thing when you do a play breakdown, because when I do it, it's a pre-recorded episode, and I just narrate the entire thing and say, "All right, editor, have fun. You match the visuals to that." I just give you text and voice. That's it. I don't have to worry about lining stuff up or circling anything. So I have a big benefit. And Barry just smurfs on those, the editor for Run It. So a question from FranzLeague, who I think this is a really fascinating question. How would you compare Tian, I guess, at his world champion form, to other world champion junglers? So players like Dandy, Bengi, who have won worlds. Do you think Tian's peak compares with those players?
I think it's really difficult to compare because when I think of, I mean, even when I think of Bengi, actually, I can't think of Bengi without thinking of Faker. And weirdly enough, even though I think Faker is the best player that has ever played the game of League of Legends, especially if you look at his progression from like season 3 through like season 7, is actually insane how much he did for the game. It's really hard for me to separate them. I'm trying to think at their peak because Dandy was like so interesting because a lot of the stuff that he did, a lot of the stuff that Bengi did, really pioneered the jungle position. And I think Tian's strength, it's really difficult to separate him from Doinby because when I think of Doinby without Tian, he needs like a Tian to succeed, right? Like in my opinion, like in order to get the most out of what Doinby wants to do, you want to have that kind of like wave coverage where you want to have him communicating really, really well with his jungler. So at his peak, that's difficult.
Yeah.
I'd
These
say
like
that
all time or legacy kind of conversations are always tough.
He's still under. Like if he goes to MSI and wins MSI, or ends up going to Worlds and winning Worlds, I might consider it. Start to consider it. But I think the early additions that players like Dandy and players like Bengi made, like to the game itself, are really difficult to compare. Honestly, to any jungler now, because like a lot of the things that Tian is doing, or a lot of things that Kanan's doing, even like the more basic concepts, some of that comes from like Dandy and Bengi, right? So it's hard to compete with. I would still give the edge to those two.
Yeah, you kind of have to change the game on some level and get people to respond to the way you play, or adapt, like follow your lead, or you have to just be so overwhelmingly successful. It's pretty hard to make those kind of legacies, but maybe we'll see him try. A question from J663 Beast: do you think Demwon will go 6-0 in their group at MSI? So they're in a group. We mentioned this before. They're in a group with Cloud9, and the teams from LLA and LJL. So Dead FM and sorry, I forget the LLA team's name.
Infinity. I think I will be surprised if they don't, because I don't see them having, like, if it was like top esports, right?
Yeah.
Or even a team like FPX that can play a little bit like funky or like fast and loose. I would be looking at it and be like, they're gonna drop a game. They're gonna drop a game or two.
Yeah. They'll just do something strange and throw one.
Yeah, and it'll be bad, or like their opponents will come up with a really good like cheese strat, like or like cheese composition. But Damwon has shown that they are willing to play a lot of things that are not standard. And then B, I think they have the discipline to not drop a game even in a best of one. So if you do see Damwon challenged, and like I said, I think they are the best team going into this, regardless of who qualifies out of the LPL. I think that it will be really hard to best them. It'll be really hard for the 3 teams in their group to best them. Like basically Damwon has to play like at their worst and or a composition that's just really difficult to execute. And then C9 has the best chance of beating them in that group, I would say. And they have to play like at their absolute best.
A lot of things have to go right and wrong.
Yeah, and that's just not it's not something that you rely on, you know?
No. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, well, I mean, stranger things have happened, and especially international play is always a little hard to predict at times, but I think we can probably expect a lot of success from Damwon going in. And one last one to cap it off here from my friend Smax. Who will win Proving Grounds now that Alorum and the Toilet Paper Cats have been kicked out?
I'm so sad. I am here for the GGA.
Okay.
Let me double check the bracket.
Yeah. So GGA are still in. Today, Evil Geniuses Academy are playing against Cloud9 Academy. Evil Geniuses Prodigies, the amateur team, playing against No.org. We've got some teams left in the lower bracket still, but those are the upper bracket ones.
Yeah.
So GGA, we have Fly Academy, TSM Academy.
Yeah, I think No.org have that. I don't think...
100 Thieves Academy, too.
Yeah, of the teams in the bottom bracket, I would say it's probably too bad 100T and GGA face each other, because I think those are kind of the 2 best teams down here.
Yeah. 100 Thieves Academy would be the team on paper most likely to make it out of those 4 bottom bracket teams, but I don't know if they've been playing quite up to their level lately. I
really like EGA, despite their in-season struggles. I think JoJo is really good. I have always liked Contracts. I think it's kind of a bit shocking that he's not in LCS, maybe, but and then No.org. So I'm expecting EGA and No.org in that. And then tough. C9A, EGA, there are a lot of good teams that could win this thing. Is those are my top 3. I'll tentatively say EGA. The team I'm rooting for in my heart for many reasons that I won't name here is Golden Guardians Academy. I think their like resurgence has been really fun to watch, and they're kind of like this scrappy underdog team that makes me want to root for them. So, but I really like EGA. I am a big Contracts believer, and I think Jojo Pyun has performed really well as well. Yeah, lots of exciting players to watch. So if you haven't been following Proving Grounds, make sure you should. It's been great. It's honestly been so much fun. And we're entering what should be the best part of the tournament. Like, you know, the best teams are left, right? So I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm going to be on the analyst desk this Saturday, so that'll be fun. And we'll see what happens in the final week of the show and all of that. We're almost into the best of 5s, which is that much more fun, I would say. So let's see what happens. Sad to see Zeus Gaming and their toilet paper cat logo out of the tournament. Now everything has to feel all professional and whatever. But here we are. Well, this has been great, Emily. Thanks very much for hanging out. Can you remind everyone of the best way for them to follow your work? Yeah, so you can hit me up on Twitter at League of Emily. I'm going to be writing for a few places and also I've been working on this beast of a score article that is like
Ooh.
insanely long and very personal about me being a fan and also him as a player. So I guess you can look forward to that if you like anything similar that I've written, like the interview I did with Peanut's mom, which is, I believe, still the thing that's pinned to my Twitter profile. But yeah, so look forward to that. I'm sure I'll be around, bopping around, commenting on MSI, not on broadcast, but just like on Twitter and stuff.
Cool.
And yeah.
Yeah, Score is one of my favorite players of all time, so I'm definitely looking forward to that.
He
I'll be all
my
over it.
favorite player of all time, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you very much. And for anyone listening, you can support the True Sight podcast at patreon.com/OraclesElixir. You can also subscribe to it on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and some other platforms, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracles Elixir Discord server where we talk about League esports, data science, other topics, other games. And links for all of those things will be in the show notes. This has been the True Sight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhuisen. Thanks for listening.